In recent decades, the idea has emerged that economic growth and innovation come from the private sector, that companies like Apple and Google produce all kinds of new, useful technologies for us, improving our lives and making sure the economy continues to grow.
So this, as they say, is where the magic happens.
But is this correct? Do we get the whole truth about the exact source of innovation and economic growth?
Als Apple zou moeten betalen wat het allemaal gekost heeft om dit te maken, dan zouden ze het denk ik nooit kopen.
In order to take on the challenges of the future, from renewable energy to new medicines, we need a constant stream of new technologies. But will we still have enough money to invest in these vital innovations? And what solutions have other countries found?
Our small country has got an exceptional high rate of the patents and the innovation that is taking place.
This is Backlight. Welcome to your innovative future. Every day, entire armies of economists and policymakers think about how we can encourage innovation and economic growth. Their main focus is on the business world, on how we can urge companies to develop more and better technology. But according to economist Mariana Mazzucato, the whole idea that new technology comes from the private sector is a myth.
How we talk about the public sector has been very boring. And because it's been boring, it's created these myths of the state at best needed just to facilitate, to incentivize, to subsidize, to create the conditions to level the playing field, and then all the really cool, dynamic, creative stuff happens in business. So if you actually look at those places in the world that have actually achieved what we call today smart innovation-led growth, what those places have required was a very strategic, active, mission-oriented, dynamic entrepreneurial state. And the private sector only came in later.
One of the examples you use is Apple and the iPhone.
So the story that we're usually told is that, there are these great people, so Wozniak and Jobs, who just sort of came up first with the computer and then later, over time, at least Jobs and his Apple team, the iPad and the iPhone, and this is used as, the myth behind Silicon Valley. And any smartphone only is smart because of the technology inside of it. And so what technology is inside the iPhone that allows it to be a smartphone and not a dumb phone is, the internet, which allows you to surf the web, GPS, which allows you to know where you are. You can use your finger. And so unfortunately, lots of our children can use the iPhone. I know my 4 children have ruined lots of my iPhones. And the new Siri voice-activated system. These are different types of technologies within that smart gadget, which makes it smart.
Alright. En als kind wilde ik dingen heel graag uit elkaar halen, maar ik was meestal te lui om ze weer in elkaar te zetten. Dat is eigenlijk gebleven.
Innovation expert Frans Nauta advises startups and is fascinated by the development history of various technologies.
Eigenlijk is dit gewoon een supercomputer. Dit is eigenlijk gewoon een supercomputer in je hand. Kijk, volgens mij zou de camera er nu uit moeten kunnen wippen. Ja, hebben ze. Overheid nummer 1. Dit is gewoon de camera. Wat het doet is fotonen omzetten in elektronen. En dit is wel bedacht in het bedrijfsleven. Dit is bedacht bij Bell Labs voor het eerst. Daarna is de semiconductor-industrie er echt opgedoken. Maar de eerste grote toepassing was astronomie. Dus de eerste echte klant was alleen maar overheidsgefinancierd. En natuurlijk de militairen. Eigenlijk zit dit hele apparaat vol met spulletjes die militairen nodig hadden voor betere oorlog. En vooral de Koude Oorlog. Dus dit is een mooie. Oké, de supercomputer. Dat wordt wel een beetje geprut. We zijn inmiddels wel voorbij het punt dat ik denk dat je het nog in elkaar kunt krijgen.
Ik denk het ook.
Ja, nee, oké. Dan zijn we het daarover eens. Als ik me niet vergis, is dit de wireless module van Broadcom. Die doet de Bluetooth, die doet de wifi en die doet de GPS. Even kijken. Ja, verdomd, dat is hem. Hij is wel een beetje beschadigd. Dit is zo klein. Maar de GPS gaat terug tot de Koude Oorlog. Dus toen in 1957 de Sputnik de lucht in werd geschoten... dat was een bal en er zat een radio in... en die zei gewoon ping, elke 10 seconden of zo. Ping, ping. En bij John Hopkins Lab in Amerika waren een aantal wetenschappers... die zaten zich af te vragen, waar vliegt dat ding? Kan ik uitzoeken waar die is? En het is net als bij de ambulance. Als die naar je toe rijdt, dan is de frequentie hoger. En als die voorbij is, dan wordt die lager. Dat noem je het Doppler-effect. Dat heb je bij radiogolven ook. Dus zij konden op een gegeven moment redelijk nauwkeurig berekenen waar die was... afhankelijk van de snelheid van die Sputnik naar hen toe of van hun af. En dat is de basis geworden voor GPS. En dat was daarna een volstrekt militair project. Dus dit is gemaakt eigenlijk voor een opdrachtgever... die het echt niet uitmaakte wat het kostte. Het was gewoon onbetaalbaar. En midden jaren 70 werden dit soort chips betaalbaarder... en toen kwam de hackersbeweging op. Dus Steve Jobs en Steve Wozniak, die Apple startten... hebben op de Hobby Computer Club was het op Stanford... waren ze dingen aan elkaar aan het knutselen. Maar die waren echt nooit voor ons bedoeld. Dus het mooie wat er gebeurt is dat deze technologie... in onze handen gekomen is door entrepreneurs. Deze is ook wel leuk, we moeten de voorkant hebben. Dus het touchscreen, dat is dan nog redelijk nieuw... Universiteit van Toronto, Universiteit van Delaware. Maar hoe is dit nou bij Apple gekomen? Nou, er was een start-up van het onderzoeksteam aan de University of Delaware. Die dachten, we kunnen hier geld mee verdienen. Dus die hebben een start-up gebouwd. Die heet, hoe heet die ook weer? Fingerworks, volgens mij. Mooie naam. En die is in 2005 door Apple gekocht. En in 2007 kwam dit ding uit, de eerste iPhone. Dus Apple heeft gewoon, op een slimme manier... universitair onderzoek gekocht... in het bedrijf geïntegreerd. En vervolgens hebben zij dit naar honderden miljoenen klanten gebracht.
You had Google's algorithm, financed directly through the National Science Foundation. You had the Navy being very important for, GPS. Anyway, you can just say, go on. And you just see that the important technological changes, which actually then allowed, if you want, the private sector to surf a massive wave of publicly financed technology, is a story that we don't hear about, right? So this 800-page book, wonderful book, which I really enjoyed, even my kids have read it, on Steve Jobs, not one page, not one paragraph, not one sentence, not one word on the publicly funded technology, which of course, Apple as a wonderfully innovative organization was able to put these different technologies together in a very interesting way by paying attention to design, simplicity, these wonderful calligraphy courses that Steve Jobs took, we know were very important in his own ability to think interestingly, but why is the narrative, why is the story, the discourse about Apple, Steve Jobs, or today Elon Musk, missing this key point of the role of the public sector?
Weet je wat dit ook? Het is natuurlijk mooi, zo'n lithium-ion batterij. Maar de eerste toepassing was hier natuurlijk onbetaalbaar. Het is bijna allemaal ontwikkeld aan universiteiten. En nog steeds, eens in de maand is er weer een onderzoeksgroep aan een universiteit... die zegt, we hebben een nieuwe doorbraak in batterijtechnologie. Ja. Een heel groot deel daarvan is gewoon wetenschap, gefinancierd door de overheid. Weet je, als Apple zou moeten betalen wat het allemaal gekost heeft om dit te maken... dan zouden ze het denk ik nooit kopen. Apple is wereldkampioen in niet de eerste zijn, maar een markt induiken als je ziet dat het wat kan worden. Dus iemand anders heeft al aangetoond dat er een klant is. Alleen je denkt dat je het product zelf veel beter kunt maken. Dat is wat Apple doet. En daarbij profiteren ze natuurlijk ook van al het publieke onderzoek. Kijk maar, het zit er helemaal vol mee.
So where did you find the story?
After the financial crisis, in the name of innovation, in the name of competition and dynamism, such severe cuts were being made to the public sector. And when those cuts began, you could really very quickly see lots of these important investment areas that we take for granted starting to wither away in the name of innovation. So what I wanted to do is to say, hey, because I have lived in the US and I do, because I'm a theorist about innovation, I knew at least part of that story of the role of the public sector. I wanted to say, hey, look, let's actually go study. And so then I went to study myself, the role that the public sector has played in terms of creating innovation-led growth. And let's make sure that these current cuts that we're witnessing today are not completely evidence-free. In other words, they're purely out of ideology and not out of any real recognition of where innovation comes from.
do big multinationals actually innovate and who finances their research and development? Aircraft manufacturer Airbus, for instance, is very interested in the 3D printing of metal components for their planes. To develop this 3D printing, they joined Project Amaze, a partnership between several companies and space agency ESA, an organization founded and funded by European governments.
This is where we run most of our polymers, so nylon, PEEK, etc.
There have been lots of projects in the past looking at plastics. We have now taken 3D printing into the metals age, and our big ambition in our project is to make the best quality metal components ever made by mankind and to apply them in lots of engineering applications, from space satellites to nuclear fusion reactors, aeroplanes. There are hundreds and hundreds of alloys that can be used for 3D printing, and some haven't even been invented yet. So we're looking at things like titanium primarily, we're looking at aluminium alloys, and we're also looking at incredibly exotic materials, including things like platinum, very expensive materials.
So this, as they say, is where the magic happens. This is where we control all of our metallic additive manufacturing. This is producing one of our Amaze sample builds. At the moment it's doing the fatigue crack growth.
What's the layer thickness we're doing?
It's a 30 micron theme, I think, for these ones.
The private side there, it's roughly about 2/3 of the companies are involved in the project, and the other third would be typically public organisations, so that's universities, government research labs, but also intergovernmental organisations like the European Space Agency. So it's a nice blend of all these partners.
Is this going to block the pound out of the way? It's going to be everywhere.
These are titanium test parts.
And I think it's probably unlikely that the project would have been born the way it was and the way it was structured had we not triggered it from a governmental point of view initially.
And why is that, do you think?
Because sometimes industry can be quite conservative even, and there are constraints within big companies, and sometimes small companies don't have quite the necessary resources that are required to bring together a large project.
The original version of this bracket was a steel casting with a mass of around just under a kilogram in mass. The design-optimized titanium version produces the same performance characteristics as the steel bracket. In fact, it's slightly better in terms of performance, but its mass is only 1/3 of the original steel one. So you can imagine with several such brackets, several hundred such brackets, potentially across an aircraft, ranging in size from a 320 up to a 380, obviously the cumulative savings become substantial.
In ESA, it's our mandate to bring benefits, technological benefits, to our space companies so that they remain competitive. So we will have examples of patents which we will then give royalty-free to companies like Thales Alenia or OHB Systems or Airbus Defence and Space, so that they can actually integrate that into their systems for the benefit of the space industry. So it's our gift to the world. Yeah.
This example of Airbus working with the European Space Agency and being given, if you want, the goods, 3D printing, I think on the one hand you could justify that, fine, that's great. We do the big missions, and in the process, there are these spillovers like the 3D printing, which came from, again, these kind of more space-related missions, and then that's our gift to the world. But if that gift to the world is completely free, if these same companies then are paying tax, who knows where? Where does Airbus pay tax? Is it benefiting from all these tax loopholes? Is it putting back into the system its share of what it should pay for getting these goods? If it was, then we wouldn't have to worry about it.
I think the real benefit that comes back to the public is in the form of, when new technologies are being adopted in factories, like the one we've seen here today, and you're creating jobs. Because, of course, to pay people unemployment benefit, that in a way you could say that's a waste of public funding. It's better for people to be employed, of course. I mean, that's the purpose of government. One of the purposes is to make sure that employment levels are high. And if we fund projects like Amaze and other things, and we have success stories and we generate products, those products need to be put into factories. Those factories need to employ a highly skilled workforce. And we have to train those people of the future so that they can actually populate the factories of the future, like in 3D printing. So the real value, I would say, is in employment in high-tech jobs, which has a strong societal value as well.
Jobs created, yes, in theory. That is probably one of the most important mechanisms. Through the jobs that are created, people then pay tax. But again, the question is the location of those jobs. We know there's massive, not only loopholes in the taxes then that the companies pay, who will, have greater profits, obviously, by being able to benefit from these technologies. As I was mentioning before, the tax rates that the companies pay have fallen massively. A company like Google, which, without the internet would be nothing, should it pay something above and beyond just taxation in order to be able to use this publicly funded technology, which is what creates their profits? Apple, Google, Amazon, Starbucks even don't pay tax. They're using the public goods. This is something that goes beyond that. Apple as well is using, the educated workforce, publicly educated usually, and the infrastructure outside. But they're also benefiting. Their massive, gigantic profits are directly related to technologies, actual innovations that were publicly funded. One of the dangers we have today is that by not putting pressure on business also to play a greater role, and in some ways it's been free riding off these public investments, we've actually in some ways allowed the business sector, for example, to become increasingly financialized. So not even doing its part. What is its part? Its part would be investing in the D of research and development, R&D, right? Research and development. The D part needs proper money, it needs an active role, it needs profits to be reinvested. What we have today in the US is massive hoarding, so close to $2 trillion being hoarded by the business sector, so not being reinvested. In Europe, it's close, I think, to 1.7 trillion, so also very high, money not being spent. We also have an ultra-financialized business sector, often spending more on share buybacks to boost their stock price, to boost stock options, to boost executive pay, rather than research and development. So there's really a crisis on both sides. We have an austerity-driven government, worried, timid, not playing this visionary role it used to play, and we have an ultra-financialized private sector.
He mentioned big pharma as one of the fields where there's practical and moral frictions. What goes wrong there?
Well, first of all, the pharmaceutical industry, also the biotechnology industry, in fact, the whole life sciences sector is exactly one where the state has played this incredibly active market-creating role. Lots of basic research, lots of applied research. And it's done so in the US, at least, through the National Institutes of Health, which have spent billions even after the crisis. In 2012, they spent $31 billion just for that sector. So then the question is, what's the deal between this kind of money coming from this public, National Institutes of Health and the private pharmaceutical industry? Well, it's very interesting. If you go back to the 1980s, when the US, just like countries all over the world today, are worried about commercialization, they set up a new law, a new act called the Bayh-Dole Act, in order for publicly funded research to be patented. That, in fact, is what led to all these startups, in the 1980s in the biotechnology sector, because patents inside universities, for example, could be used to start up a company. In the act, it says, we better be careful. The taxpayer should not pay twice. They shouldn't pay for all this research and then very highly priced drugs. So the government, precisely because it's publicly financing, most of the research, both basic and applied, behind these innovations, should have the right to limit the prices of drugs. The government has never exercised that right, which for me is really the symbol of where the problem is, which is not only do we not admit the role of the public sector, but even when we do, the government, because of the narrative we have today, because of what we've sort of, come down to, no longer has the confidence to, get back what it's due. And in this case, it was just something very simple, which is the prices of those drugs that are publicly financed, the price should reflect the public contribution. Why is it that the public has not had the courage to actually implement that particular right that they had?
Collaboration between government and the pharmaceutical industry is most urgently needed for the development of orphan drugs, medicines for rare diseases and therefore products with few customers.
Ik was denk 22 of zo, 22, 23, toen ik buikpijn kreeg. En de huisarts dacht van waarschijnlijk iets met een blinde darm. Gaan voor de zekerheid maar een echo maken. Dus ik ging naar het ziekenhuis en er werd een echo gemaakt. En toen zagen ze geen blinde darm, maar toen zagen ze dat mijn milt en mijn lever groter waren dan normaal. Dan ben ik eigenlijk door de hele medische molen gehaald. Van alles geprobeerd, maar men had geen idee wat het was. En ieder half jaar werd geconstateerd van je milt is groter, je lever is groter. Ik werd steeds moeier, maar niemand wist wat het was. In die periode promoveerde Carla Hollak in het AMC op de ziekte van Gaucher. En mijn internist las dat en dacht, ik heb een patiënt die soortgelijke symptomen heeft. Laten we eens kijken of dat een match is. Dus toen heb ik een DNA-test hebben ze me afgenomen en toen is uiteindelijk vast komen te staan dat ik inderdaad de ziekte van Gaucher had. Het was voor mijn gevoel ook wel net op tijd, want ik had ondertussen een milt die in 3/4 van mijn buik lag. Zo groot was die, iets van 30 keer te groot. 4,5 kilo. En mijn lever was veel te groot en ik werkte nog 4 dagen en s'avonds lag ik voor pampers op de bank.
Meneer Timmerman. Hallo. Hi, kom verder.
Dus het had een naam en toen kon ik eigenlijk naar het AMC toe komen voor behandeling. En toen is de enzymtherapie eigenlijk, zoals die hier nu loopt, ook begonnen.
Dit zijn de uitslagen van november. En wat je vooral ziet is dat die marker, dit is eigenlijk de belangrijkste, die aangeeft of je nog wel of niet veel Gaucher-cellen in je lichaam hebt.
Volgens mij zijn er in Nederland in behandeling, ik dacht iets van in de 60 of zo. Ja, het is inderdaad een hele zeldzame ziekte. En ik denk dat het is in de mate zoals ik het had, qua grootte van mijn milt en dat soort dingen, werken zat er niet meer in. En dus in die zin is de kwaliteit van leven voor mij natuurlijk met sprongen vooruit gegaan toen het medicijn ging gebruiken.
Oké, je bloeddruk is in ieder geval prima.
Wat mij wel eens verteld is dat het in verhouding, het aantal patiënten wat het gebruikt en wat het kost, geloof ik, het duurste medicijn is, of een van de duurste medicijnen is. En dat moet ik altijd wel lachen als ik naar de apotheek ga en dan krijg ik voor 2 keer medicijnen mee. Dat zijn dan 16 flesjes, van die kleine flesjes. Dan heb ik dus voor een mooie middenklasse voor €32.000 aan spullen bij me. Gewoon 16 flesjes. En dan los van alle spuiten en andere spullen. Medicijn is gewoon peperduur.
Hoeveel kost een behandeling van een Gaucher-patiënt per jaar?
Ongeveer €150.000 per jaar, gemiddeld.
Waarom is het zo duur?
Wat vaak genoemd wordt, is dat de kosten van zo'n geneesmiddel niet alleen maar te maken hebben met het geneesmiddel zelf, maar dat kosten binnen zo'n bedrijf natuurlijk ook opgevangen moeten worden voor middelen die de eindstreep niet halen. Ja. En daar gaat, denk ik, een substantieel deel naar marketing. het is ook nog geen spat goedkoper geworden in de afgelopen 20 jaar. En ja, naar mijn beste weten wordt daar geen echt bevredigend antwoord op gegeven.
Ik denk dat er nu mensen, als ze dit zien, ook denken van, nooit geweten. Heb je dan een gesprek erover en komt het erover, dan vertel je dat wel eens. En dan snappen mensen ook wel dat dan duur is. En ze snappen ook dat als het effectief is, dat dat dan waard is. Ik heb geen alternatief in de zin van, ik kan geen paracetamol ervoor slikken. Het is of twee andere medicijnen die hetzelfde effect hebben, maar die ook even duur zijn. Dus qua prijs op dit moment maakt het gewoon niet uit.
Oké. Even kijken, wat mis ik nog? Plakbandjes hangen klaar, alcohol, nou prima.
En het grote probleem is natuurlijk dat wij een beetje klem zitten. Wij bepalen de prijs niet. Dat bepaalt de farmaceut.
Als jij er klaar voor bent, ik ook.
Dat bepaalt de fabrikant wat de prijs is. Terwijl de partijen die daar in eerste instantie in hebben geïnvesteerd, die krijgen daar dat niet voor terug. In ieder geval zeker niet de overheden die daarin hebben gesubsidieerd. Die moeten in feite dan opnieuw weer gaan betalen voor een product wat er dan uiteindelijk uit is gekomen. En als je ook goed kijkt naar de criteria waaraan een weesgeneesmiddel moet voldoen, dan is een van de criteria dat zonder stimuleringsmaatregelen zo'n middel eigenlijk geen kans zou hebben om tot winst te leiden. En dan kan je je ook voorstellen dat dan nuttig is. Maar omgekeerd hoeft het natuurlijk niet zo te zijn dat zo'n geneesmiddel dan leidt tot zulke enorme winsten dat vervolgens er allerlei problemen ontstaan in de gezondheidszorg en dat we die middelen in feite op een gegeven moment niet meer kunnen financieren.
Well, I talk quite a bit about the orphan drug policies, precisely because that's a very classic area where you should have government intervention. Again, very little debate about it. You literally have a missing market precisely because there's so few clients for that market. So no private firm would invest, $1, €1, or anything into that area because they don't think they're going to have a client, right? You only get investments where you think you're going to have a market. And so the government for these orphan drugs, basically provides, almost all the financing. And that's all fine. Up to now, we're fine, right? The question is then the prices of these drugs are absolutely astronomical. So the government hasn't gone that extra step, which is to say, yes, we have actually made this market, literally market making. It's such a classic case because otherwise the market would not have been there because you only have 60 or so, patients for that particular drug, so you would have disinvestment. Why is it that they didn't also feel the right to name the price, right? Why do they just go halfway there? And it's really, really, I think, unexplainable. Unless you say we are in an era of capitalism where we no longer have a notion of sort of social value, public value, beyond this very narrow definition of the public good by economists. It's really the most dysfunctional, innovation ecosystem that you can have. It's literally predator-prey. Don't forget that often it's not really the patient that has to pay that price. In Europe, it would be the welfare state. In the US, it would be the Medicaid, Medicare program. But that's, again, the public sector. You're still paying twice, right? You're still paying it through your tax system in order to purchase. So this is where, again, my sort of ambition is really to convince policymakers of different types to stop using these trendy words like public-private partnerships or ecosystems of innovation and actually together, alongside industry, decide, well, what would make this ecosystem a mutualistic one and not a parasitic one? Because the problem with a parasitic one is it increases inequality, it hurts access, but it also hurts future innovation. Because some of the profits from the price of those orphan drugs should be coming back to the coffer, the public coffer that actually financed it. It's not. Today, public money is under attack. So innovation will not happen. And this is not about secular stagnation, which is the usual way we talk about these problems about future growth, as if there's something deterministic. We've invented everything that could be invented and somehow the growth will only occur in China. No, we have a massive investment crisis.
How do you make sure that it isn't just businesses that benefit from technologies that governments help to develop, and that at least some of the proceeds will go back to the source? In Denmark, the government found a solution to this question by starting its own investment fund, the Danish Growth Fund, which buys shares in Danish startups.
We have invested since the inception of the Danish Growth Fund approximately 2 billion euros in some 6,000 companies, and we expect to do some 300 to 400 million euros this year in 800-900 companies.
And is it all technology-based?
Not only technology-based. There might be, for example, this is a glass made by a company called Muto. It's a design company, and it has been a very, very successful company. We invested 1 million euro in it 10 years ago, and now it's a fast-growing company, and we earned our money back 12 times on this. Not technology, but it's design, it's innovation.
One of the companies supported by the Danish Growth Fund is Universal Robots, co-founded by Esben Østergaard. He developed a revolutionary robot arm that is very easy to use.
It's a new kind of robot, so it's more a robot which is supposed to be a tool for people to use rather than this big machine behind a fence that steals people's jobs. So let's say we want the robot to do some simple motion. So let's say I wanted to start here. Then I wanted to go down here. And then I wanted to turn like this. And now I'm done with the program, so now I can just press play. And now the robot is going through these points I just programmed. And now the robot can run for 4 years, 5 years, like this. So you're done.
And how would this be compared to traditional?
It's radically different. So this is really easy to do, and you can do it in a very short time. And the same people working on the factory floor can actually learn how to do this. Instead of you need to have experts coming in every time you need to reprogram the robot.
And did the idea immediately take off?
The idea took off, but it took 3 years to make the robot. So that was a lot of work. And we spent all the money we got. We ran out of money. We spent some more money. We got a loan. We spent that. And then we had absolutely no more money. And we were pretty desperate. So more or less by accident, there was a guy from the National Danish Growth Fund, Vækstfonden, who looked through the door and asked, "What are you doing?" And then that's where this collaboration started up with them.
Wow. Was it that close to?
It was really close. So we had 3 months without pay to our people. They didn't get money. We had to pay from our own pockets for their salary. We didn't get any salary on our own. We had sold 4 robots or 5 robots. We had delivered 2 of them. The remaining 3 robots we had gotten money for, but we couldn't deliver because we didn't have the parts. And we hadn't paid for the previous parts for the robots we already delivered. So the companies to deliver the parts, they were not happy to give us more parts before we paid for the previous parts. So it was a very bad situation and very, very tough to pull through there. I mean, the private investors did not invest.
Well, we came across these 2 young guys in 2007.
They were visiting another company at the university called Escape, and they also walked into our office. And I don't know if somebody told them, please look in there also, or they heard about us or what, but it really looked like a coincidence that they found us. Maybe at that time it was like a 50-50 thing, if it would survive or not.
I guess we invested first time in 8, an amount of 2 million euros.
The company grew in size. The critical phase was to get to a sales volume where the numbers were actually, so you make black numbers on the bottom, not red numbers anymore.
Yeah.
And that happened at around 20 robots per month.
And then we divested the company here in this spring.
We sold the company in May to Teradyne, a big US company. So now they own Universal Robots.
We got our money back 50 times on the cash deal alone. So we got back some 100 million euros on the cash deal, and then on top of this comes an earn-out. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I would say there would be a lot of private investors that would be
certainly.
Jealous.
Certainly, they envy this sort of investments.
But it's a lot of money they got out of it.
Was there a big celebration around the office?
Oh yeah, sure.
You can see this one here is lifting weights. So it's testing, it's basically warming itself up. This one right here is testing the mechanical stresses of the system, because the plate doesn't look so heavy, but it is actually quite heavy. And then the robots also sometimes do cool down. So it's a mix between warm up, cool down, and stress testing. It is a lot like the workout you do at the gym. It is simply lifting weights.
So, as we have just earned an enormous profit on universal robots, 100 million euros, it'll all go back into new companies. Hundreds, maybe, of new universal robots.
So, but it doesn't flow back into the state coffers?
No.
Doesn't go back to the Ministry of Finance?
It's recirculating. So these years we are profitable, and we will of course put aside some money for a rainy day, but then we will invest the rest into new companies and make sure that it grows. The best we can hope for is really that some of the other private investors, they do like we do in the future. So in the end, we will be obsolete, and we can hand over the key to the Treasury and say, hey, mission completed. We created 10,000 companies, 100,000 jobs, and here's the profit and the key. That's the end goal.
For Mazzucato, a government that makes sure it gets sufficient reimbursement to continue funding innovation is only part of the solution. She sees something else happening in Denmark, which is why the country keeps topping the lists of most innovative countries. And this reminds her of the past.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
What I love about that speech is that he basically argues that it's important to dream. It's important to be crazy in some ways. And just think of Steve Jobs' speech. You know, be hungry, be foolish, be crazy. It's mixing the two, right? In other words, we're only going to get big things to happen when both the public and the private sector are allowed to dream, think big, think about future missions.
And finally, the space effort itself, while still in its infancy, has already created a great number of new companies and tens and thousands of new jobs. Space and related industries are generating new demands in investment and skilled personnel. And this city, and this state, and this region will share greatly in this growth. Even though I realize that this is, in some measure, an act of faith and vision, for we do not now know what benefits await us.
The vision of Denmark is to become completely fossil-free in 2050. I would like to see Denmark out of fossil fuels in 10 years in the energy sector.
In recent decades, ambitious ideas and long-term visions have become rare in politics. But Martin Lidegaard, Denmark's previous Minister of Energy, made it work.
Such an agreement where you involve the whole energy sector and you have the whole parliament, practically speaking, behind you, and the industry and the green organizations is, of course, a very big maneuver. It took 2 years to prepare and negotiate it, and it was hard to do it, I can tell you. But the good things are that everybody is on board now.
With a combination of new energy-saving technologies and large-scale utilization of wind energy, Denmark is coalescing its forces to achieve its ambitious goals.
We are right now on 42% in energy, but when it comes to power production, we are on 50-55%.
In Denmark, a few years ago, they decided that by 2050, the whole economy has to be fossil fuel free. Now, is that the kind of Kennedy-like, man on the moon-like big vision that you're looking for?
Yes, absolutely, for 2 reasons. First of all, it's concrete. You'll know if you've achieved it or not. Some challenges, like aging, it's not clear, what does that mean? So a mission-oriented challenge should be broad enough that it goes beyond just a sector, right? But also concrete enough that you know when you've gotten there, so you can start worrying if you're too far away.
Personally, I would like to set even more ambitious goals. I have compromised myself, but I'm happy that we have reached such ambitious level, and I will fight to keep that ambitious level because I'm pretty sure it's good for climate, but it's definitely also good for the Danish industry.
The other reason that it's good is precisely that it requires lots of different sectors to interact. I've been actually a critic of some industrial policies that have come out recently, including the top sector approach in Holland or the key sector approach in the UK, because what does it mean to say automobiles, aerospace, creative industries, finance? What do you want those sectors to do? So having a much more sort of problem oriented mission, which then kind of requires lots of different sectors. About 14 different sectors were required to go to the moon, including innovation and clothing, right, and textiles. Those are very interesting because it produces a kind of dynamism. And in fact, the kind of dynamism we have today in places like Denmark are extraordinary.
I mean, this is all where it began. But then it became a big business, and then of course the size follows with the development of the technology.
The ambitious Danish plan to accelerate the switch to renewable energy is not just good for the environment. The Danish economy has also gained new large multinationals, such as wind turbine manufacturer Vestas.
The collaboration between the different stakeholders in the wind industry, or wind sector, government, utilities, producers, developers, financiers, everybody has had a say, and I think that is one of the good things. You do not develop the turbines that we have today without research institutions, universities, specific classes in university dedicated to the wind energy industry. You don't get to where we are today if you don't have that collaboration.
If you don't have a stable and long-term political framework, it's very hard to move investments and innovation in the private sector. The other way around, if we don't, as politicians, listen to the demands and the requirements from the private sector, take them seriously, then we can't expect them to make the investments. The public sector is best at making stability. That's what we can do politically, whereas the private sector is the best one to make the the concrete solutions, find the technologies most efficient and appropriate, and make the innovation.
Not only has this mission enabled, allowed, fostered really interesting kind of manufacturing level policies where they're literally the #1 in the world for both solar and wind, especially if you look at it per capita. They also have become, for example, Denmark has become the #1 provider of high-tech services to China's green economy. I mean, how cool is that?
There's no doubt that to be a first mover in such a big area as energy give you a lot of advantages when it comes to innovation and new patents. And if you look at who's actually taken the patents in this area in Europe, you will find that our small country has got an exceptional high rate of the patents and the innovation that is taking place in Europe. And that of course take investments. But there is a reason why we are the country in the world with the highest export of green technology comparably to our size.
For business, this is the way we're going. You put on the long-term glasses, and if you have the long-term investments as well, you know where to go. And the fact that Denmark can not only export its products, such as turbines and pumps and energy-efficient systems, and then it's the fact that we can also credibly say that we can actually do it at home ourselves is worth a lot of money. I think that the agreement is very ambitious, but it's not stupid ambitious. It actually makes sense.
There has not been a tradition for politicians who dare to say, we actually want to move our societies in a specific direction. We know we have a climate challenge. We know that it will be our generation who will deal with it if we should solve it. And that's why we need to say we want to move our societies in a direction.
The real key point in my work is how to make capitalism functional, how to create public-private partnerships that are mutualistic and not parasitic, and how to ensure that we set up the contracts, literally the deal between public and private institutions, so that we can actually do these great things again and again and again and again and again